Welcome to the virtual colloquium series In Conversation, Arts and Culture for Well-Being, organized by the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project at the University of Pennsylvania. My name is James Powelski, and I'm professor of practice and director of education in the Positive Psychology Center at Penn, and the founding director of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to those who are joining us live today and to those who are watching the recorded version of this event. The mission of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project is to understand, assess, and advance the well-being benefits of engagement in arts and culture, focusing on individual and collective human flourishing. We are grateful for support from the Drew and H.J. Heinz II Charitable Trust and the National Endowment for the Arts, which has designated the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project as an NEA research lab and is supportive both of practice-informed research and of research-informed practice in the arts, culture, and well-being. You can find out more about the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, including our publications and how to sign up for our newsletter, on our website at www.humanities-and-human-flourishing.org. That's humanities-and-human-flourishing.org. And thank you, Catherine. She just posted that in the chat. So today, we are thrilled to continue with our colloquium series, which features presentations by and discussions between scientists and practitioners on topics concerning the arts, culture, and well-being. Before we turn to our distinguished speakers for today, let me preview the plan for this colloquium. We will begin by hearing two 20-minute presentations, one focusing on science and one focusing on practice. Then I will moderate a brief discussion with the speakers before opening it up to a Q&A with all of you. At any point during the session, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat. If you would like to share these verbally, please wait until we open it up for audience participation toward the end of our time together, and then raise your Zoom hand. And with that, let's turn to our speakers. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Megan Stutesman. Dr. Stutesman is a postdoctoral research fellow at Queen's University, Belfast. Her research focuses on the intersections of social cognitive development, psychology of the arts, and sociocultural and contextual influences on development. She earned her PhD in applied developmental psychology from George Mason University in 2024. Outside of academia, Megan is a dance teacher and a former professional dancer. So Megan, welcome. It's great to have you here, and we look forward to hearing what you will be sharing with us.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get my screen sharing set up here. Can we all see this okay?
Yes.
All right, let me just move you all. Second. Okay. All right, so here we go. So thanks for having me, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Today, I'm going to be talking about my research on children's social cognitive development and well-being in dance arts. Quick agenda, I'm going to go over my broad research program. I'll highlight a couple of my projects on this topic, the big picture takeaways and implications of the work, and then hopefully that will lead nicely into Sarah's talk that will follow. All right, so how is social cognitive development related to the arts? Well, throughout human evolution, the arts have been connected to various psychological processes and skills. Everyone from philosophers, artists, teachers, neuroscientists, parents have all been interested in and have suggested connections between the arts and social cognitive skills. In fact, I originally got interested in this because I'm a dance educator, and I started to think about how what was occurring in my dance classrooms was impacting children socially, emotionally, and cognitively. It's one of the reasons I went back to grad school to study this scientifically. Empirically, though, engagement in the arts has been connected to the development of various social cognitive skills, and connections between improved social cognitive skill development and participation in the arts have been found for participation in theater, visual art, literary art, and music, but we don't really have much on dance. So today I'm going to talk about my work on the connections between social cognitive development and dance. But first, what's social cognitive development? Let me define it here. So there's a whole bunch of different social cognitive domains and different terms used. I've included some of the terms on this slide. Each of these terms are a collective under social cognitive skills. They often develop in tandem or parallel to one another, or are related to one another phenomenologically or in real-world application. The sort of binding factor between these various pieces of social cognitive skill development and why they're important is that they all involve interpreting cognitive and emotional information for the purpose of social behavior. So we're social creatures, and social cognitive skills are what allow us to have successful relationships, perform well in the workplace, excel in academics, and so forth. And for this project, I'm going to be focusing on theory of mind, which is simply defined as the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and others. And it has two major subcategories: affective theory of mind and cognitive theory of mind. Affective is concerned with affective mental states, such as emotions and feelings. And cognitive is concerned with the sort of non-emotional states, so thoughts, intentions, and beliefs. And this is one of the foundational social cognitive development processes. It's rapidly developing in childhood. Baseline abilities are established by about 5 years old, and then we see continued rapid development and plasticity in middle childhood. For this study, or the studies I'll show today, I'm mostly focusing on affective theory of mind, so the emotion stuff. So the social cognitive cues that allow us to understand another's mental state or emotion, as in theory of mind, come from multiple different information channels, including facial expression, auditory and voice expression, body expression, and contextual information cues. Of note, each of the art forms that have been connected to social cognitive skill development primarily rely on one of these channels that transmits the emotional and cognitive information. So theater relies most heavily on facial expression cues, music on auditory and vocal cues, and literary arts or visual arts on contextual cues. The piece that's missing here is the body transmitted cues, and the art form that most heavily uses body expression is dance. So I set out to study this and focused on dance to fill in this missing connection here between art form and social cognitive skill facet. Which leads me to the first project I'll discuss. So to first begin to study this, I asked, are there differences in social cognitive ability between those with dance experience and those without dance experience? And I conducted a study comparing those with at least 10 years of consistent dance training in any style to those without dance training, which was operationalized to be like less than 1 year of dance training. It's fairly common to have taken like a semester of dance or a class or two. The participants were recruited from college major dance programs all around the United States, and the control group through an undergraduate psychology pool. So the ages would be closely matched between the groups. And this was sort of to get at the prolonged experience beginning in childhood, because college-aged adults would have had to begin their 10+ years of dance education in childhood. And I compared the groups on several different measures of affective theory of mind. And simple regression analysis with dummy-coded dance group, control group, revealed that indeed the dance group had better social cognitive ability, specifically for the measure of body-focused social cognitive skills, where they were asked to attribute and understand emotions based on body cues. Okay, so back to this slide here again. So now I've got some early evidence in a young adult sample who began their dance training in childhood for this missing link on the connections between dance education and social cognitive development. But there still haven't been any studies examining this in childhood, which is especially important considering that dance is a super common activity during childhood and that social cognitive development is especially plastic and rapidly developing in childhood. Which leads me to my second study. It's a much meatier study. I'm going to go a little more in depth on this one. So to address this, I conducted a quasi-experimental mixed methods study with children, parents, and teachers with the overarching mixed methods research question: in what ways is dance education implicated in childhood development of social cognitive abilities? Quantitatively, we examined the relationship between children aged 7 to 12 years old, their participation in dance, and their social cognitive development. And to do this, we compared children enrolled in dance classes to children enrolled in sports, soccer, over one academic year on several different measures of affective theory of mind and empathy. And then group differences were compared at baseline, as well as group differences in change over time. Qualitatively, I was looking to explain the pedagogical processes and experiences within dance education that allow it to be used, or how it's already being used, to foster children's development of social cognitive skills. And to do this, I conducted interviews with dance teachers and used child and parent open-ended responses, which were thematically analyzed and coded using a phenomenological approach. Data collection happened over the course of 1 year, with child and parent data being collected at the beginning and the end of the school year, and then the qualitative teacher interview data collected throughout the middle of the school year. To collect the data, I partnered with 9 local extracurricular youth organizations, and then data collection occurred out in the field, for which I had research assistants and myself use a mobile lab setup where we went and met children out in the community at our partner sites. The mean age of the children was between 9 and 10 years old for both groups. And I just want to comment here on the control group, the soccer control group here. So children who participate in extracurricular sports, or soccer in this case, were an ideal control group because soccer is a physically demanding activity requiring physical acumen and technique similar to dance, but it's missing that key component of interest, which is the artistic expression and interpretation. So this is going to allow for findings and inferences to be specifically tied to dance education and not just like general physical motor expertise or general, extracurricular activity, which also has been shown to promote social cognitive skills. So the soccer group controlled for a lot of potential confounds. Based on my findings with the young adult sample, I hypothesized that the dance group would perform better than the control group. First, I'll start with the quantitative strand results. So to test this, I used linear mixed effects models where scores from each of the measures were standardized and treated as outcome variables with, again, a dummy-coded dance group, control group, and time, pre-test or post-test as fixed effect interaction variables. Child age, gender, cognitive capacity, or IQ, as well as other demographic covariates such as race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status were added and controlled for. And my hypothesis was partially supported. So the dance group children performed better than control group children on both of the body-focused measures of affective theory of mind, but we saw no differences on the other measures, so the measures for facially cued or contextually cued theory of mind. However, there was no interaction between group and time, indicating that the sort of quasi-experimental treatment of children's participation in dance was not associated with greater increase in skills than children in the soccer control group between pre and post-test. So basically, this could be selection effects. So these graphs here show the dance group children in purple, the soccer group in green, and the dance group children are scoring significantly higher on both body-focused social cognitive skill at pre and post-test, but there's no difference in growth over time. So this graph on the left here is affective theory of mind for body valence, so their understanding of positive, neutral, negative emotions. And the graph on the right is for discrete body expressed emotions, so their understanding of specific emotions like happy, surprised, fearful. So, because of the quasi-experimental nature of the study, though, I couldn't randomly assign children to take a full year of dance or a full year of soccer. Most of the dance group had prior training in dance education, and some of the children in the soccer group also had prior training in dance. That's the nature of quasi-experimental studies. But because many of the children in the sample were not new to this quasi-experimental treatment, it was also informative to examine the effects of prior dance education experience on baseline pretest differences. And that's what this graph here shows. Years of prior dance education indeed predicted affective theory of mind ability. So because I found selection effects and this significant correlational finding of prior dance education years predicting social cognitive performance, I imagine that if I'd caught all children at the very beginning of their dance education, or if I was able to run a randomized control trial, that we might have seen group differences in change between pre and post tests. So it's definitely an area for future study. And now I'll move on to the qualitative strand results. So the qualitative strand, child and parent participants were identical to the quantitative strand. They were given open-ended questions at pre and post tests, spanning general educational experience questions to questions targeting social cognitive related experiences. I also interviewed 17 dance teachers, and teachers were selected from across the community partner organizations to be nested within the child sample. Teacher selection and interviews were conducted until saturation was reached. And there was a good range of ages and years of teaching experience, mean age at 42, mean years of teaching experience was just over 19 years. And teachers were interviewed using a semi-structured interview format. So I've got a ton of qualitative findings, but I'm just going to present some of the highlights. There's sub-themes for each overarching theme as well. A lot of really rich data, but for time's sake, I'll be super brief in reviewing these. So embodying emotions and interpreting embodied emotions. Participants reported that embodying emotions in dance education and expressing and interpreting one's own and others' emotions through body movement is embedded in the pedagogy of dance education and is related to social cognitive skill development. So here we have one of my favorite quotes ever from a teacher. They say, "You can try on being a rotten tomato here. You can try on, do you know what? The ballet that we're doing, it literally has anthropomorphic vegetables, which we do have rotten tomato. It's great. You get to try on those identities, and that gives you an opportunity to be different. Try being emotionally explorative without a permanent, like without mistakes. It's just a learning tool." Perspective taking. Participants explained that social cognitive development is supported through perspective taking in dance education, which is practiced in two primary ways. A, through taking the visual out-of-body perspective of peers or audience members, which is directly related to the empirical definition of theory of mind, where there's this self-other distinction of mental and physical states. Or B, through taking the perspectives of peers in the naturally occurring classroom setting social situations. So here we have a quote from a child. "I've been able to understand other people's emotions and help the people around me when they're having a hard time, and I feel like I listen better ever since I took dance." Executive functions also emerged as a social cognitive related skill that dance education fosters, and sub-themes of executive function emerged as well, which align with the three primary components of executive function that are discussed in the empirical literature, including working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. So I have a working memory example here. This teacher says, "The idea of being able to count music, be able to perceive what the counts are, understand the architecture of the music, the patterns that are involved, the memory work that's involved." So working memory, the ability to mentally hold information and act on that information, is developed through the process of memorizing and executing choreography, as well as actively integrating new information while dancing. And then teachers, parents, and children discussed how dance is an outlet for children to express themselves, process their feelings, relieve stress, manage emotions, and learn about themselves, which contributes to their emotional well-being. So here we have a quote. "We all have a way in which we express our feelings outwardly. We all need it. Just like any other form of art, the point is to bring your emotions outside of your body and observe them, understand them, process them." And just focusing on this well-being theme here for a minute. So I ended up writing a whole separate manuscript on it because this theme emerged purely through inductive qualitative analysis, and it wasn't as related to the quantitative social cognitive findings as the other themes. So I found that dance education was being used to address systematic oppression and could be especially helpful to the emotional well-being and self-actualization of children from marginalized backgrounds if it's done well, including children of racial ethnic minority backgrounds and LGBTQ plus children. So here we have another quote from a teacher. "Especially for people of color, it can be a place for expression, because sometimes, or a lot of times, kids just don't want to communicate how they're feeling through words, so at the very least, they can communicate through their bodies." So now I've explained all these themes. With additional axial coding, there were two higher order themes that emerged. And those themes were safe space and natural social environment. So these themes were discussed as higher order themes because without the presence of a safe space and without the social setting of dance education, the pedagogies, processes, lived experiences within dance education described in the other themes and in the quantitative findings might not occur. So participants suggest that the existence of the safe space of the classroom and the natural social environment, these are kind of like the umbrella over the other themes that allow the other themes to happen. So safe space means that, outside the children's lives at home or school, they have a place where they're supported. That dance education is aimed at being a warm, welcoming, constructive environment for the children to feel comfortable to try and fail, to essentially practice their social cognitive skills in a constructive environment. And then the natural social environment, dance education is a natural social environment. It requires the use of social cognitive skills and their applied derivatives. So the group setting, the collaborative working environment leads to a better understanding of navigating social cognitive skills and their applied derivatives, including friendships and working relationships. So to wrap this study up, quantitative results showed that childhood dance education is associated with increased affective theory of mind for bodily expressed emotion. Qualitative findings triangulated the quantitative results and illuminated the various pedagogies and experiences in dance education that are related to social cognitive development, most related to the quantitative results that dance education affords children practice embodying and interpreting emotions. So taken together, the quantitative and qualitative findings suggest a meta-inference drawn by linking the qual and quant findings, which is that dance pedagogy promotes the practice of embodied emotion expression and interpretation in a constructive environment, which fosters the connection between participation in dance and improved affective theory of mind for body expression. Therefore, children who participate in dance are better able to infer others' emotions based on body language. Okay, now to wrap things up here fully, arts-based researchers and arts teachers and parents, again, have been suggesting that the arts, including dance in this case, are related to social, cognitive, and emotional skills for a long time. These are some of the first studies to empirically examine the relationship between childhood dance education and social cognitive development in theory of mind, as well as explain the processes and experiences that might support that development. Though the mixed methods findings suggest that dance education provides a platform for children to engage social cognitive skills in an applied context, and that this contextually relevant application of the skills might usher in social cognitive development in a very practical manner. Findings highlight the importance of the mind-body connection in social cognition and the arts, and findings might also inform future social cognitive interventions or future research on how social cognitive development is implicated in children's dance, other arts, or sports, or other extracurricular participation. So to conclude, I'll just say that dance is an activity that children readily partake in, and it may be a fruitful medium through which we continue to build our scientific understanding of the multifaceted social cognitive development processes in childhood and work to support children's well-being and positive youth development. Real quick, before I conclude, I have to note that these studies I presented today were partially funded by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and all of the information is the opinion of the author, myself, and is not reflective of the opinions of the National Endowment for the Arts. And lastly, I'll just say thank you to the children, parents, and teachers and community partners who participated in the research, my host institutions, collaborators, and research assistants, some of who are pictured there, and the funders. And that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan. That was really fascinating. So much there to unpack and talk about and converse about. But before we do that, I want to turn to our second speaker, and we'll hear from her next. And this is Sara Lavan. So Sara Lavan is the founder and director of the Local Motion Project, a dance organization in the DC metro area, and the LMP Collective, an intergenerational adult dance ensemble. She is a teaching artist with the Kennedy Center and on the Virginia Commission for the Arts teaching roster. Sara serves on the National Dance Education Organization's Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Accountability Committee and on the Executive Committee of Alexandria Beyond the Classroom. She participates in extensive continued learning related to the field of dance, and she received her BA from New York University. So Sara, welcome, and we're delighted to hear what you have to share with us.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Sara, as was introduced, and our nonprofit dance organization is in Alexandria, Virginia, which resides on the traditional land of the Piscataway, Doeg, and Anacostan people. My pronouns are she and her, and for a visual description for anyone who would need that, white woman with black glasses, and I'm in a dance studio setting today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great, so there we are. We just did that part. Some of the slides will be a little text heavy. I'm not going to read at you. So you can look at them later. I might pull out some highlights. As a dance educator and someone who is deeply invested in all the connections to the things I'm interested in my scholar brain, and how we developed who and what we are here in Local Motion Project. There's a lot of background. Dance is a big word. There's a lot of different definitions of how people think about it when you say dance. So I'm just speaking from my perspective, how we have grown, what we have discovered. So I just want to say that out loud, write down all your questions. I don't know what prior knowledge is coming in, so I'm just putting as much up there as possible. What I just want to point out here is this is the mission and vision of the entire organization. We have youth and adults and do intergenerational performances. But what we are talking about today is going to be about the youth curriculum and pedagogical approaches and that development. One of the big things here is, I think, that last bullet, which is celebrating conscious disruption and knowing that meaningful progress requires challenging traditional approaches. So we'll see that throughout. Our approach to youth, I have to change my little people, okay. I'm not going to read at you, but I will just highlight that the creative process is a main component to our curriculum. The students are, their voice is important in the room. They have agency in the room. There's a student-led portions and teacher-led portions, and this happens in all of our dance classes, including our ballet classes. They learn how to create and make meaning out of movement. Some of the things that we have been, that we've considered as we were going along, and we were founded in 2016, thinking about the definition of dance, right? What comes to mind when people think of dance? Images, ideas, and dominant culture. So I think of the picture of the ballerina that is often used for dance. Again, privileging a dance form that has left people feeling very excluded. We think about what's on the shelves, the posters we're using, what books we're using. How are we talking about dance? Is what we think dance is about, is it because of the dominant culture that's making those observations? Dance studio versus dance in public schools or higher education. How there seems to be a disconnect a lot of times, not always, none of this is universal. This is from my 20, 30 plus years of experience and conversations in the field. What we're teaching our students in dance studios has remained somewhat stagnant often in how we're talking about dance, and then you get into higher education and they're exposed to all these things and things are challenged and questions, and that creates its own sense of trauma about not feeling like you were taught the right thing or feeling maybe ashamed of what you did or did not know, or the other, just being really adamant about what you learned. There can be an inflexibility of thinking in some ways of presenting dance education, and that was very interesting to me. And then always, who's been excluded? Like, who are we not listening to when we're getting this information? And that's what I focus on a lot. I sat at a lot of tables where I was quiet and just listened to people who had different experiences in dance than I did. How did we get here? How do we start looking at all this? I mean, I founded it on the very basis of just coming from New York and a lot of the dance studios here where I live, it was very centered around the costume and ballet and not about movement principles. And so I wanted a place that felt that we were really getting to the core of dance, and it wasn't about what the superficial things were about the art form. And so it started trying to include boys. I mean, that literally was it, that language has changed so much for me since then. So that trajectory is even interesting on our journey. I'm not going to dive into this. I just want to highlight that we started with, I do a lot of work with the National Dance Education Organization, and they provide so many wonderful resources for professional development. But this is how we started looking at curriculum, the creative, the creating, the performing, responding, and connecting. And this is a framework of how we figured out how to get students to be able to look at movement and analyze it or ask questions about it that weren't I don't like, and try to expand their ideas of what could be dance, what they might like once they had more vocabulary. Sometimes we think we don't like something if we don't have the knowledge or we don't know what to look for. So this was an excellent framework for us when we start. And I'll just note that performing here also is just doing the work in the classroom as well. It doesn't necessarily always mean on stage. And then 2019, we received a racial equity grant. So even before all of the uprisings and all of the conversations in the dance world, which were probably already there, but were lifted up to people who may not have heard them for, literally and figuratively. So we have our statement about this, but what we found, so we did allyship training in the studio, all board, all staff was required, and it provided a framework and language to hopefully create a safe space for people to come in, to know that we are considering these things. We were looking at our own biases, looking at our blind spots, and learning how to listen, to be curious, to ask questions. And it served as a really great model for all types of marginalization and erasure. What does it look like in practice, specifically for inclusion? Teaching true histories of dance forms. This, for me, what comes up the most for me when I think about it is jazz. Jazz is taught with ballet terms. It is, it removes it. Sometimes it's removing improvisational. It's not talking about the history of jazz when we're looking at dance studios. Removing financial barriers, scholarships, the common fare there, gender neutral dress codes, use of preferred pronouns, and all teachers are, I would say, trained, because most of us did not grow up like this, to not say girls, to use gender neutral language, dancers, friends, artists, right? To make sure that we're getting our teachers to use that and practice that. Providing programming in neighborhoods, and books, videos, resources, making sure the studio is full of things that not only reflect yourself, but maybe open your mind to other ways of seeing dance, even if we're not teaching it here. And then obviously providing professional development for our teaching artists. This is just, people have probably seen this, this is just the SEL that after we did the core art standards, then we kind of dove into all of the racial equity and inclusion work. And then we were here doing social emotional learning, and that came because we do a lot of work that's parallel with educational philosophies that are sort of current. So when it's like happening in the public schools and every teacher is learning, it's like every year there's a new thing we're talking about. It's like the 3 C's, like this, that, it's like there's always something. So it was SEL. And so we started looking at that, and we found that this in dance, just aligned so naturally. But what I love so much about this, and this was presented, the statement on the top with the PA Department of Education, that it's inherent in the arts, but my belief system and what I've noticed is it is impactful when is it intentionally embedded. So if you are just dancing in a studio, maybe you're not not allowed to talk, you're just following the teacher, or you're going to competitions. I believe, and I'm not a researcher, I'm just a practitioner, that is very different than when you're embedding conversations how to speak to children who process things differently, how to change your language, how to update language in dance studios is going to have a different outcome with those students. It's also what I have observed, but again, I have a small sample here. But you can see some of the things that are highlighted here, you know, because there's a lot of partnering, there's a lot of conversation, conflict resolution, learning how to assess dance without I like, I don't like, respecting other feelings. There's a lot that we do around this. And then there's just some natural things that were overlapped with the standards of learning and SEL. And we just started seeing that with every training, there was overlapping language, whether it was SEL or cultural responsiveness in teaching, trauma-informed teaching, disability in dance. It's getting back to expanding your viewpoint beyond your own experience and being aware of people who have been silenced or marginalized, and learning that language. So we just keep finding these, and they're all excellent entry points to continue to elevate our impact through dance education. This is just an example of some of the things that we do here that we don't necessarily see in a lot of dance studios. Is we start teaching fundamentals of movement. Many ways of saying it. There's also many ways of organizing this. This is not one way, but we like this one from the Perpich Center for the Arts. Our students learn about body, action, space, time, and energy, and start learning this language to talk about movement. So there's also often a privileging of ballet language. It's been so far, it's long since I've done that I'm always like surprised when I hear it in another dance class, particularly one that doesn't come from the same place at all. So our teachers are asked, and we strive to use this language when we're teaching and not ballet language, and even practicing it in ballet class. So, you know, bending your knees, near reach, far reach, going up, traveling backwards, like just finding what the actual movement is, rather than like plie and assuming that everyone knows what those are when you come into another dance form. We teach our students that ballet is for ballet. That is what you need it for. And it is useful in other forms. It's a tool like any other dance form, but a lot of people are taught that ballet is the foundation for all dance, which is absolutely incorrect. So we do this, and this is a great tool for also observing dance. Like sometimes if you don't actually, I mean, we all have dance, I mean, I don't know if you've all seen dance, but I see dance that I don't love. But so what I'll look at is like, oh, I wonder what the pathway they chose was. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why they chose to do a group instead of a unison. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why they went backwards there. Like you can start teaching students how to question and be curious rather than bored or I like and don't like. It's teaching students to not sit down and be quiet and clap at the end, but gives them something to do to engage with during the process. This is just an example. This is actually pulled from when we did dance integration. So, but the format is the same, just giving an example, and it can be spoon-fed in the younger ages, but then we start seeing how when you get comfortable with that kind of questioning, how you can start thinking outside of what you may have originally asked. It just starts to change how the students look and ask questions of one another and how they respond to each other's dancing. We bring this all the way to the parents. So in our programs, might be a little small, I don't know how it looks on your screen, but we like to put language in there to get the parents to also look at dance in a different way. We really consider ourselves dance advocates as well. Again, dance is a big word, but for our organization and what we do, that we tell the parents that even if which rarely happens, if a student doesn't want to go on stage, you could still ask them like why did something happened in that dance, because we are building dances with our students, their voices in the choreography. They are never in a line looking off the stage and watching their teachers, ever. They are fully embodied and part of the process, and it's a joyful moment where our students share what they know. Our youngest ones will help each other out verbally and correct each other on stage, and it is so beautiful to watch that come together and create this safe space for them that doesn't feel disconnected And if we have a young group who may or may not be ready or want to be on by themselves, our teachers are fully on stage dancing with them. They are fully supporting them. They're not like off on the side where where the kids are looking. So we often get comments about how wonderfully our kids are musically, how much they use space, and it's because we're taking what they learn in the classroom and they're doing it. It's just a funny anecdote. I feel like I have to share it. We had this one, I wish I had the video, but there was I think they're 4-year-olds. They're running around in a circle and they were a little early and they had to do something else at this music cue, and a bunch of them tried to do it, and this one little boy was like, wait! And then they all sat there like this for I swear it must have been 10 seconds. And then the music cue, and then they all went out. And it was just such a, it was so cool, I was like, that's it, right? They're just owning it. Super exciting to watch what they do with this information and how they talk about dance. Some of the things we have on our educator shelf, Turning Point is a great one to dive into some of the history of ballet, learning how to talk about some of the inequities, some of the things that we want to change, or I want to change. We, meaning here, us at Local Motion Project. The jazz dance book is also awesome. Great historical context, how to, one of the highlights I took from there was when you're teaching, it's how do you teach jazz? So even if you're doing Broadway styles and all those things, what are you teaching first? Are you adding on later where it came from and the music and what was part, or are you starting from where it came from and lifting that up? So that is how we teach. And we try to use jazz music all the time because the pop music in its 8 count, it's not how jazz was created. So dance forms that were created often in tandem with musical forms, we try to be as authentic about that as possible. However, also acknowledging where dance goes, what has happened, and have fun with that too, but making sure that we're educating our students when they go out in the world about this. And then our bookshelves look a little bit like this for the kids. They get to read all kinds of fun books, and this is just a tiny little sampling of that. And then how do we support our teaching artists? So, a lot of times teachers, like I said before, are coming in the same studios that I'm talking about, wanting to sort of evolve, right? To bring it to a more enlightened space. So there's a lot of teaching, there's a lot of conversations, we have a lot of conversations, there's a lot of support here for teachers who struggle doing certain things in a different way than they were used to. So these are some of the continued learning. Sometimes it's a full group, sometimes it's me doing it and then sharing, reporting out. I try to do as much as I can possibly, so I am always as equipped as possible to best serve the teachers and the students with new things that arise. We do find that our studio, we do have students who are actually not welcomed in other places often. So that goes back to me questioning who the voices are when they're being talked to in dance studios, because we do a lot of work with students who, I would say, anxiety, neurodivergence, and sort of the ADHD flavor that are integrated into the classroom here. We do a lot of work with parents, partnering with any doctors or professionals that are on the team, working with, putting charts up on the wall of what to expect next, having, just trying to figure out what's going to best support that student in this journey that may or may not just sort of go through a dance class the way a neurotypical student might process things. And also recognizing that at 53 years old, I don't know what it's like to be that age. So I have to listen to the students and the anxieties that they have and what they're experiencing. So I try to teach I don't teach young ones as much anymore, but I try to get in at least once a year to do some sort of residency. So I'm always having my pulse on it. And that's, not a monolith. One dance class is not going to tell you what all kids are feeling, but I do try to get in and see what some of the language might be, some of the things that they're saying. We started for teachers to keep them to help them and to not be always just talking, telling them what to do, we came up with an idea of developing their own self-assessment. And I'm highlighting, this was actually the last part of it, but because we added some of the SEL components to it after the one that they built. And they just look at it in September, how they're doing, you know, in January and May, and the comments are unbelievable that I get from the teachers, the growth that they have, because you self-reflect, you sort of set your own goals. And I think it's important that adults are also doing SEL work or any of the other things that I shared, because we can't just do this for our kids. We have to look at also how we are self-managing, right? How are we connecting with people? What's our social responsibility? So I think getting adults to do this who are teaching children, it really creates this incredible like unified vision of what's happening, and it feels very connected. And this is the first part of it. So some of these are just like kind of curriculum related, like making sure like that based chart for teachers who might fall back into the habit. It's just a checkpoint without me having to like stand over my teachers and make sure they're doing what they're doing. And then they also reach out if like, oh, I don't know, like I'm having a hard time with this one. And then it's like a really nice place when I meet with them, like what's coming up, what's a challenge and how can I support you? Currently, I'm in a cohort with other youth providers of services here, programming. I'm the arts person, so it's all like recreation centers, soccer, all the things. But we're part of this cohort, the Weikart Center for Youth Program Quality, and there's an assessment that goes with it. Process, and we're basically test driving this to see if this is what Alexandria wants for their approach for their after school programming. But what was so interesting in this, again, is if you look at these buckets, it's like there's just constantly this like repeatedness of making sure we're engaging, making sure we're listening, making sure we're being relevant, right? Self-management, making good choices. So these things are just repeated over and over in all of the trainings that we keep being a part of, which is really exciting, I think. And that's it. Look at that, an abrupt end. So I think I covered it. I hope you all have some questions. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you, Sarah. That was really, really fascinating. Yes, very much looking forward to the conversation portion of this session. So to start off, Megan, I'd like to invite you to comment on what Sarah just shared with us based on your experience as a researcher, and in particular, the studies you shared with us. What strikes you as particularly interesting, valuable, intriguing about the work that Sarah is doing?
I think what kept coming up for me several times throughout her talk was that a lot of the problems, or maybe not problems, conversations that you highlight in the practitioner dance educator space are also like so relevant for the research side of things as well. So like the definition of dance, that's like what is dance? How do we define it? And how do we define it for our specific goal, whether that be education or research or, you know, whatever. The part about dominant culture and inclusion and exclusion, who's included and who's excluded, that's something that psychology work has historically, like dance, had lots of problems with and is trying to undo now in our methodology and our ways of going about things. So I just thought that there were so many like direct parallels of different topics that you touched on that also come up in researcher conversations.
So, yes, I agree, Megan. And I think, you know, part of the reason why this research has not been done to the degree to which we all, I think it should be done is because it's difficult. It's, you know, it's really challenging to try to design a study that is crisp and clear, and, you know, because in part, arts and culture are not, I think, intended to be crisp and clear in that kind of a way, right? So one might argue that well, it's just a fact, I guess, that we're mixing kind of different traditions and different intentions, right? And so whatever we might identify as intentions of dance, I think they would probably be fairly different from what we would identify as intentions of empirical scientific research, right? And so, Megan, I wonder if you can just kind of, before we turn to Sarah, if you can just elaborate a little bit on A, whether you agree that there's that, tension there, and B, what are some of the steps that you and your colleagues have tried to take? And maybe have you had any even incremental success, do you think, in trying to bring kind of these different intentions together?
Well, I think I don't fully agree that they're completely different, because I think they're completely different if you ascribe to the idea that psychology and empirical science research, if you think about it in a very post-positive light, where we're doing quantitative work, we're doing randomized controlled trials, and everything is very clean and tightly organized. But I think that that negates the fact that there's a whole other side of research that is less talked about often in psychology realms and is probably more talked about, at least in my experience, in education and in more anthropology, sort of bottom-up approaches that lean more heavily into the chaos, if you will, the sort of like not everything doesn't have to be clean and straightforward. So I think that one of the ways I've addressed this and my approach to it is to take a very pragmatic approach and say, okay, well, we sort of need the like quantitative post-positive side of things for legitimacy and to be seen as like a real thing in the scientific empirical world. But also let's acknowledge these sort of inherent truths about the subject matter that we're studying, which is that it's not clean and tightly organized and randomized control trial. So the way that I've done that is through mixed methods. And in my talk, I talked about the mixed methods bit a little bit. But I think that the arts generally, but especially in art like dance, where it's ephemeral, it's not like a painting on a wall where you have it like codified and it's there, or it's not music where you have a recording or whatever, it's embodied. I think that the qualitative approaches and really listening to the participants' perspectives and lived experiences are key to being authentic to the art form, but then also key to engaging that art form and bridging the art with the more like post-positivist empirical side of things. So that's how I've tried to approach it,
Yeah.
is to sort of like take the best of both worlds.
I like that. I like that. Sarah, I'm guessing what Megan is saying is resonating with you in the sense of there's the crisp, clear data that people maybe who are evaluating or funding or looking at this from the outside like to have, because if you can translate something into a number, we can do stuff with numbers, right? But on the other hand, Megan is saying that we don't merely have to rely on those kinds of assessments, because there are other ways also of maybe being a little more open to the messiness or the vagueness, the ambiguities, the dynamics of dance, and still be able to come up with assessments in some kind of way. Curious to what degree this comes up in your work and how you handle it.
I mean, right, so much. And I just would almost even reframe like chaos and messiness to just human. So I think that when we start thinking of one thing being like we're already saying something about dance. The way we talk about dance. I went to a workshop and it's like, you're gonna do interpretive dance, just kidding. You know what I mean? It's like there's always like a joke around dance, right? So we're already setting people up of people who do and people who don't. When dance comes from people, was included, all people, our like codified like dance that has been capitalized is a system of thing that happened. People were excluded, and like dance did not start that way. So this have and have not, people who do and don't, I'm so interested in language change and how that creates a culture where it doesn't feel messy, but super expansive and beautiful. And I think that getting human stories is, for me, 100% scientific accurate. That is 100% true. If I hear that someone has healed something or feels different or lives differently, that is like absolute data for me. And when I write grants, I am very clear that I am not here to do numbers. I am here to help humans and impact them. And that investment in a human is more than a light investment or touch on a lot of different people. And so, yeah, so there's just a lot, right? Because they all want it. They all want it. And I will say also, with another thing that's interesting, because I will always lift up that it is approach, that we have, I mean, I've been at the tables with many, many people who have been traumatized by dance education. So we say all these beautiful things about it, but I actually hear quite differently when I'm talking to people. People love to throw it on their website, say that dance does this and dance does that. Actually, most people I know are terrified to come back into the studio. So we had a person who started ballet as an adult here, and we talk about this a lot in our classes, and she was just like, it's so funny how you say that. Like, I don't feel like ballet does that at all. And I was like, exactly, because you're not getting that here. Because you're being introduced to it in a place that's body positive and teaches it to your body, not on a body that was like at one point designed. It didn't even start that way, but that's a whole other webinar. But yeah, so I think, I don't know, I guess a lot resonates with me on how we measure and why we have to. Like.
Yeah, fast. Okay, so let's take what you just said, Sarah, or at least some portions of it, and think about what Megan shared with us about her research with theory of mind. Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but it seems to me that you're saying like not all experiences with dance are equal, right? And so some of them may actually backfire. Others of them may actually open up the kinds of spaces and positive experiences for people. So was there anything, Sarah, that you remarked about what Megan was saying, or that you wanted to kind of ask her about when she had the experimental group of dance versus the control of soccer, which I think was really fascinating. Are you wanting to say, well, are there things within that experimental group of dance that might not be completely homogeneous?
Always, because that's what I always think about, and Megan knows this. So like, I want to know if all of those kids said they felt this one thing. There are these kids that have been really welcomed in this little ballet studio, and they're all performing well and behaving, and they never had a teacher get annoyed with them. So like, is that why they didn't have to pull their hair back with hair that doesn't go back in a rubber band that like made them hurt? Like that they weren't called a pronoun that they didn't want to be called, that, do you know what I mean? That they couldn't get something or a movement and they had to stand in the back of the room. And I could go on and on. So yes, I always have lots of questions about that, but out of curiosity, right? It's just something I think about a lot. I think about this all the time. I'm just obsessed with dance and all the places that it can touch in humanity. So yeah, I do think about that.
So Megan, we're getting more to the chaos and messiness, or as Sarah said, the humanness of this. So curious, Can you talk more about, how this, how you grapple with this really in your scientific research?
Yeah, so certainly there's humanness and lots of heterogeneity in the samples and the styles of dance that I've included in my research. It was like there's all over the place in the amount that the children are dancing or the adults are dancing, whether that be 20 hours a week and they're like training to be professional, or whether that be like a 1-hour recreational dance class on a Saturday morning. So there's huge variation, lots of chaos, if we're going to use that term that we've sort of coined here. And I think one of the ways, I'm going to be like a broken record here. One of the primary ways I deal with it is through mixing methods, because the quantitative work gives us that number picture that grant people want, that, funders want, that parents want sometimes. But it also can drown out all of the voices and all of the heterogeneity. So I like to think of the qualitative portions of my work as sort of uplifting the less well-represented, underrepresented, marginalized groups and giving them agency and a voice in the research. So in those pieces of my work, the qualitative pieces of my work, I like to get at the more messy parts of it and maybe the not so good parts of it that the quantitative work glosses over and gives you this nice like graph that's like, yeah, dance kids are doing great. So that's why I like to use the qualitative work.
Terrific. So let me build on what we've just been discussing. Megan, you quite rightly pushed back a bit on me for having a kind of a binary between, dance versus psychological research. So well done. But I'm going to persist and present another binary, recognizing that it's problematic, but I think instructive to think about it in kind of extreme terms and kind of locate ourselves with respect to them. And the contrast that I want to draw is between expression and excellence. Again, those are not opposites, but they do, I think, get to different approaches, I'm guessing, in the dance classroom and intentions for dance, right? So, you think about some people might say, well, I'm going to send my child to a dance class because they're then going to become a good dancer, a great dancer. They're going to achieve in some kind of a way, right? And I think that dance teachers who are focused on certain definitions of achievement would probably approach their teaching in certain ways. And then there's the sort of more expressive side, which is more, Sara, you had some just really beautiful ways of talking about valuing the experience of these kids and not assuming that we know what those experiences are, not kind of forcing ourselves on them. But then you might say, well, but if kids are just in the classroom expressing themselves, how are they going to get good at the dance? And I know these are problematic, kinds of opposites, or I'm stating it in problematic opposite ways. But I think these are through lines that affect not only dance and dance instruction, but all of the arts, right? You think about, some of my students, when I take them on a field trip to the art museum, they wonder whether they should be allowed in because they don't know the art history and they don't have that excellence in terms of all of that. And I say to them, yeah, but as long as you're human, you ought to be able to have an experience. Like, that's all that's required here, because what we're after is not some kind of an exam on the history of art, but a kind of experience with regard to art and well-being. So is that question making sense? And how do you try to negotiate that continuum or contrast or something between those kinds of intentions where we want kids to be able to express themselves, but then quite frankly, there's also a kind of a sense of mastery that comes. The kid, Sara, that you were talking about, who's like, wait, like, he wasn't just saying, okay, if you guys want to, go early, that's fine. He was like, but there's a cue that we've got to wait for, right? So there was a kind of excellence that was kind of he was demonstrating there, which I think is, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Curious what your thoughts are about all of that.
So many. It was like really hard to stay quiet, actually. And that goes back to my neurodivergence, but because I knew where you were already, like at the beginning. And I want to talk because I think a lot was said that needs to be addressed, and I don't want this out in the public world with those definitions. So first of all, how are we describing excellence? What happens in the dance world? So I'm also an advocate for the field changing. So it does, sometimes it's like even hard to measure because I'm trying to do so many things. We often see artist versus educator. They're the same thing to me. In fact, being an artist and educator, if you're educating like we are, you're going to be a stronger artist. You're going to know how to reach your audiences better. I would not say the other way around. If you are just taught to follow, you are not necessarily an excellent educator. And we see that professional people are always hired in the dance world to go teach master classes, and they have not had any pedagogical training. I would say also, it is completely, in my experience, untrue that excellence has to be separate from learning how to understand your body, what art is, the history of everything in the dance form. It might take longer because we're spending some time talking. We're not drilling bodies, which, by the way, that's another presentation, but scientifically should not be done. The history and the scientific studies of how dancers should be conditioning is also something that has not caught up. We do that here. My dream would be that people are loving, exploring, talking about learning history and physically challenging themselves for a while still having a childhood and then dancing longer, right? Like, I'm performing at 53. So you know, the fact that people think that their dance career ends at 30 or that teaching is a fallback rather than something beautiful to uplift is because they're not being taught how to teach. They're not finding how it's all the same thing. Like I can look at all dance and find something similar. I can look at teaching as the same way as me developing new work, as the same way as getting a student to do something excellent. And the more I teach, the more I learn, the better I can get these students to understand their bodies and have whatever excellence or skill development that people need. Will we be a competition studio? No, probably not. Are we going to send someone to a ballet company? No, and we're putting that directly on our website because we're not a ballet studio. And I also think you have an obligation as a dance studio to never say that you're in a professional training program. You have no idea if these people are going to be professionals. I think like a responsible dance educator would give them all of the reasons and all the things they could keep doing with dance. That there are no no's, but some things are harder than others. And if you're not going to New York by the time you're, you know, X, Y, and Z to do SAB, like you might get a smaller ballet company, but even these ballet studios are just, you know, teaching all of these dancers that without any other framework or any other ways of moving their bodies, and then they don't come back in the studio. They just go and have another job, and sometimes they don't go to see performances. Like it's been such a sad part instead of ushering people beautifully into the world of dance and how it exists and creating more people to advocate. And it can be all different ways. The training and excellence can look in many different ways, and that's what we try to teach and expand our teachers on. It is a work in process. That is why we are called Locomotion Project. I have yet to have a dancer that like goes on to be a professional dancer because we haven't had anyone graduate yet. And none of them take classes to that level because to you, what you were saying, how people imagine a studio that puts this much into it, right? They think it's like you're running in the woods with scarves. Like, I mean, that's like, you just sound like you're like, you know, the Montessori of dance studios, when we actually are quite disciplined here, which is why I loved SEL, because it had the self-management and the discipline in there. So there was a way for us to frame that. Our students they have tasks, like there are things they have to do. Just because we treat them as human beings does not mean that we're not a training studio. Sorry, I'm really passionate about that, obviously. But
no, yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And I appreciate that. And I want to give Megan a chance to weigh in too. Let me just say that we are now at the point where we will be welcoming questions, comments from the audience as well. So if you want to chime in, feel free to raise your Zoom hand. Megan, curious your thoughts on this.
I agree with everything that Sarah said. I knew exactly what she was going to say. I could like tell just by her like fidgety body language as you were asking the questions, James. I was like, we'll let her take the reins with this one. No, I agree with everything she said. I will connect it back to something I mentioned earlier though, and that Sarah talked about is the definition, and like dance is a big word in that the excellence versus like expression thing, even though if we want to, you know, reframe it, I think that it's like there are so many different goals and purposes and intentions for dance. It's such a big word that it's like, it's not even a spectrum. It's some, I don't even know what, it's some web of something that from a research sense is hard, but also from just defining what it is, and then therefore defining what a dance education experience can and should look like is very complex and depends on a whole bunch of different things. I'll also say something that like came to mind as Sarah was talking, as I'm thinking about my time as a dancer and a dance educator and now as a researcher, is that in every sort of dance space I've been in or general art space that I've been in where dance is a topic and it's framed as throwing around scarves in the woods, as you said, Sarah, it very much feels like dance compared to, rightfully so or wrongfully so, compared to other art forms and compared to other research topics is like the Wild West when it shouldn't be the Wild West. Like it sort of feels like we're always considered this like crazy out there thing when it's like, I don't know why people have this mental image of people throwing scarves in the woods and think, oh, dance research and dance educators are just, they're the out there people. I don't know if you've had this experience, Sarah, but I've had it on the educator side and the researcher side. And it sort of resonated what you were saying and jogged my memory of this like Wild West analogy.
So some of the things that you both are saying remind me of conversations that I've had with a former student of mine who has graduated from our Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. And she was a dancer with the American Ballet Theater. And we had conversations, Sarah, kind of at the other end of the developmental spectrum, let's say, about problems with the experiences, with the expectations, and the undervaluing of the individual's well-being. And so it seemed, at least from one of the things that I took away from my conversations with her, is that it seemed that there was this emphasis on, performance as something that is more and more athletic, more and more stunning, more and more, oh my goodness, how could this person possibly do this thing? And thus, more and more in a sense performative, right? So just kind of going out and wowing the audiences more from a physicalist kind of standpoint than from, an aesthetic standpoint. Like, is it really about connecting them to experiences? And I love, Sarah, the way in which you were talking about the instruction in dance is kind of helping kids to get a whole language about their experience, about what this is, right? And I think that maybe it's audiences also who need to have a kind of language about this, so that they don't mistake the ballet for the circus, let's say. And not to disparage the circus, but the circus, you go and you're like, oh my goodness, how in the world can this person do that with their body? Which I think sometimes can happen in dance, but I don't think that's the major point. That that there are other things, other aesthetic goals of dance and connection to emotions and communities and so forth. So Sarah, I'm curious if any of this resonates with you further.
Yes. And, there's always like an and also, and I could probably have a comment for everything because I live in this world. I will just say that, yes, there are many purposes. And just to like what Megan was saying, and and not to, just putting things in boxes, I have a hard time with it. I think it's just because of the way I'm wired, and it's because of the work that I do. Ballet is looking for technical excellence. Generally, I mean, like that's, to be a ballet dancer, you are doing things to your body that are quite unnatural for quite a long period of time, and there's ways to do that, and that's I love ballet. I still take ballet. So there's entertainment aspects to some dance, right? Like, I don't want to put it in a box, but you'll be in an audience and everyone, like, there'll be this like gorgeous moment of like, and then someone does a flip and everyone claps. And so I think this is what I am very interested in is, to me, and again, this is going to sound boxy and it could be debated for hours, which we don't have, but like, what is art is even more like also what is dance. So what is creativity? Like, if I worked for a place that was like, creative aging, but they were just playing like sheet music. And for me, creativity is doing something new with something. It's not just being a technical, like a technician. So when we talk about artistry and dance, like, are we a technician or are we an artist? Are we expanding our thinking? Are we connecting it to something more? Are we able to make meaning with movement? Are we able to see beyond the technical mastery? Like, that to me is how I look at art. Again, this is my experience and how I look at it and what I try to impart. So I think there is like a lot of different ways of looking at it. And a lot of people's references, by the way, are ballet when they talk about dance. So, which is a complete outlier to a lot of dance forms. So it's hard to, and then there's modern contemporary, like what I do, which is like, you think dance is hard to talk about. It's like, there's no elevator speech for that kind of dance form. So, it's just like, you're just constantly like grabbing at things to let people try to get excited about what you do and stumbling over your words. But, because it's a thing that you do with your body. Like, you're the tool, you do everything. You listen, you count, you learn, you expand, you have to like follow, but you also have to create, you have to perform. I'd say expression is inseparable from dance. If you're not dancing with expression, I'm not sure why you're doing it. What that expression is, it doesn't mean it always has to be big, but there should be a feeling like with everything you do, even like a plie, a way you look in the room, where's your focus? Is it near focus? Is it far focus? Like, you know, like how are you moving your body? Like those are the nuances to me that make dance what it is in all the forms actually that I have seen, because you see people that come up in wherever they're getting their dance forms and learning about them, like what comes up with the people that make the dances. Like there's personality, there's history, there's lineage, like there's stuff there. And if we're just being robots when we're dancing, I think I just think we're missing something.
Sarah, part of what I love about listening to you speak and interact with you is how eloquent you are in speaking about dance. I think people who are experts in a particular art form aren't always people you want to hear talking about it. But the way you talk about this, obviously, you're passionate about it and insightful about it. And it's really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Megan, I want to shift to you and research now and kind of talk about, I know you also have been a professional dancer, but now thinking about the passion of the research side of it. And I know you're at the beginning stages of, you know, the work that you're doing, and this is very exciting. And I want to push you now to be a little irresponsibly, you know, kind of dreaming a little bit and like thinking about, you know, the future of this work. What directions would you like to take it in? What kinds of things would you like to explore? What kinds of benefits do you think? You mentioned, I think, a little bit about, you know, interventions or, you know, so could there be a whole new class of interventions that might arise from this work? Like, what are your hopes and dreams for this research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, the thing that's most immediate in my mind is continuing and follow-up studies, but like the ones I presented today, similar sort of vein, but specifically for marginalized youth. So how can dance be a space that is a productive, you know, safe environment that will uplift the well-being of dance for marginalized youth? Because I think a theme that has come up in what Sarah said and what I said is that it looks different, and there's often people who are included and excluded from the spaces. And I think, at least in our Western world, a lot of that is children who have already been marginalized. So I would be interested in examining dance as a space for children experiencing marginalization, primarily probably children of racial ethnic minority and LGBTQ plus children. Some of my early qualitative evidence that I showed today suggests that it can be especially beneficial to the well-being of those types of students. So that would be one area to go from initially. Now, it's challenging as a researcher to do that because it's an access issue, both from a researcher standpoint, but more so from a community standpoint of those are the children who have the least access to the art forms usually. It's a money issue, it's an accessibility via geographic location issue. So there's a lot of, that would be a big sort of grant situation where, you know, I would love to like bring the arts to those communities. It's also challenging to study that because I think the best work should be community driven and not researcher driven. So if I'm coming in and saying I want to do this work with this population, that's inherently not the best way to go about things. So I really would love to take time and build relationships with the communities that are already doing this work and are already offering these types of dance spaces to children of marginalized identities, and go from their perspective and really, as a researcher, be a tool for them, and then take the work from there. So that's sort of where it's a lot to grapple with and think about, you know, especially as a white woman who is trained in ballet and all the things that we've been talking about today. But that's where I would love to take it, is to build the relationships with the communities that's already doing this work and then see what they're interested in learning about the work from a research standpoint and be a tool for them.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful, Megan. Not every researcher is able to speak in an inspiring and passionate way about their research, but you just did. So thank you for sharing that with us. I see that we have a hand raised, so let me turn to Catherine for her question. Catherine, I think you're still on mute. There we
Yeah.
go.
It's like I hit it, but it didn't take notice. But thank you, Sarah and Megan, for lovely presentations on kind of your respective work. I think my favorite slide of the day was, Sarah, yours with all of the like terminology, the BASTE or based or however whatever it was called, because in kind of my research work, a lot of what I focus on is more from the appreciation of art form side rather than the creative aspect, and specifically most recently in visual art specifically. And I know in those studies and those conversations and working with participants, a big thing that we've seen, and James, I think you alluded to this a little bit, is people don't know what to do when they're having those aesthetic and arts experiences. And so something that we've been very interested in the research is how can we create different access points so that if someone doesn't know the grand history of Picasso, they can still have a meaningful experience with that artwork. And so that language that you had presented feels like a really nice entry point that doesn't assume you have specific training and all of that. And I was just wondering if both of you are nodding, you're like, yeah, we know. And I'm just curious if you could just speak to how you've seen that language be a nice access point, be a way in for people who maybe from the appreciation side, from the student side, of just getting more meaningful experiences and having that much more accessible starting point to engage with the art form more meaningfully and deeply.
Yeah, we actually developed curriculum for dance integration based on the Kennedy Center's changing education through the arts model. We adapted it a little bit, but teaching the art, like the two forms with equal weight. So, sometimes when you hear like dance for like in schools, it's, like you're just like moving or gesturing, like whatever they're trying to teach. That is not what we do. So the base chart was really useful. I'm just gonna use this analogy here and I'm gonna get right back to the art. So like if you were looking at the 3 different kinds of clouds, sometimes I don't remember any of them because we learned it so fast and then we're like in doing the next one because that's not my expertise. But you would look at it and then the kids would describe that, right? And then you look at the base chart and you'd be like, what words do you think? Oh, it's like high. Oh, that's in levels. Oh, it's like, it's round. Oh, that's in like shape. That's, and you start like thinking, and that's when you start seeing that everything is connected. And we do a lot of art response. We do our showcase this year is art in motion. So, we have them look at brush strokes, shapes that they see, colors, and then feelings that they might feel from it. We give them historical context always of artists and art forms. It's part of everything we do here. So everything is contextualized. Like within age appropriate ways, right? Like no one's getting a dissertation on, and we try to lift up actually artists that are outside of the canon, that back to like who's telling the stories. We try to use local artists or artists that are not ones you hear. It's same with dancers. When we're talking about dancers in the history and in the canon, we try to find as much as you can because some of the history isn't there. And so I think it's such an excellent point. I think like dance actually, like all of that actually helps you connect to everything. Like you can find it in language, you can find it in words, you can walk down the street. I mean, you put your seatbelt on, it's like cross lateral. I mean, it's like everything that you do is, it starts being in this framework of our bodies and how we exist in space, and like what a beautiful thing to like your body and how it connects with everything else. I don't know, did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, no, it just struck me as like this could be a really nice entry point for people are like,
it's great.
It sounds cool to do a dance thing, but I'm like scared or nervous because I don't feel adequate enough in some regard, like technically or
email me.
From like
email me. I have like so many templates for this. I teach people how to do this all the time. I do professional development on this. So
beautiful.
I can give you
Thank
ideas.
you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that comment. I have one eye on the clock, and unfortunately, it looks like we are just about out of time. So maybe just I'll just pause for a minute to see whether Megan, Sarah, is there any final word that you'd like to leave with us, or provisionary word that you'd like to leave with us at the end of this conversation?
I don't know. I think that this sort of dance research connection is something that's less explored than it should be, I'll say. I think that this conversation has been great, and hopefully it's a jumping off point for many more conversations. Dance is hard to research, so I think that like continuing to talk about collaborations between practitioners and researchers, particularly in the dance space, because dance is such a embodied, ephemeral sort of, fleeting thing, and it is so culturally embedded and contextualized. I think that conversations like this should continue to happen. So yeah, it's been really fruitful.
Yeah, I just want
Fantastic.
to say
Thank you.
thanks for inviting me. I mean, just thanks for, this has been so awesome to talk about my life's work, really. Like, it's just really, I'm just so grateful every time that we get a chance to do anything like this. So thank you all so much for this.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, yes, I agree that I think that the things that we talked about today are important, valuable, not easy topics to kind of feel like you've gotten to the bottom of. I feel like we've just had a very tiny beginning to the conversation today, which is great. And I hope that I with you, Megan and Sarah, I hope we'll be able to continue these conversations and to support more of this kind of research collaboration between empirical researchers and practitioners. As we wrap up, I just want to again give thanks to Megan Stutesman and to Sara Lavan for joining us today and giving us such thoughtful presentations and opening up new spaces of thinking for us. I'd also like to thank Catherine Cotter, Associate Director of Research, and Sarah Sidoti, Associate Director of Operations of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, for all of their work behind the scenes. And finally, I'd like to thank each of you in the audience, both synchronously and asynchronously, for joining us. It is great to have you with us. This wraps up our In Conversation Colloquium series for this academic year. We appreciate you having joined us for this year's thought-provoking and inspiring conversations, and we look forward to welcoming you back to In Conversations in the fall. To keep up to date on all the upcoming colloquium sessions, we invite you to sign up for our free newsletter, which you can do by, again, visiting our website at www.humanities-and-human-flourishing.org. So thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, and be well.